Greetings, amigops, and top teners everywhere. Welcome back to Top 10 with Kyle and Mike. I am your co-host, Kyle. Opposite me today, as he is every week, although a little later this week than we typically do, is your lovely and eloquent co-host, Michael. This week, Mike has prepared a top 10 list of some topic of which I know nothing of. He's going to relay that list to me. We're going to vigorously debate it. By the end of this episode, we will have arrived at a definitive version of this list. Mike, tell the good people, what is our topic tonight?
All right, K-Dog. So we're actually going to be talking about a topic that is somewhat related to our recent Chris Wars pod. So in the wake of the Chris Wars pod, I received a phone call from my father, and now we're soon to be, in his mind at least, permanent co-host Jerry.
Oh, does Jerry listen?
Jerry does listen. Complaining bitterly that we'd overlooked Christian Bale. So I explained to him that Christian Bale was not really eligible for that list, and that, of course, Christian Bale would have been number one on that list if he were eligible. I don't think anybody calls him Chris. So, he's not really in the Chris Wars.
Nor does anyone call him Christopher. And though we never said, I think you even said we were excluding Christians, you gave the example of Cristiano Ronaldo, but yeah, I think I'm fine with us leaving Christian Bale out.
Ultimately, I think it was the right choice. We sort of contemplated what to do with the Christians, the Christophs. I think we were sort of unclear in our formulation, but then we're kind of clear at the end that they weren't included. Point is, it reminded me of how wonderful Christian Bale is, which got me thinking and got me Googling. As you know, he's got a new movie coming out called Vice.
Yes.
So I have to temper your expectations a little bit. The reviews actually are not that great. I know, it's very surprising given the hot streak that Adam McKay has been on. Here's the review that, you know how Rotten Tomatoes does a synopsis?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read this to you. It's brief, and I think it perfectly encapsulates Christian Bale and what I'm trying to get at. Vice takes scattershot aim at its targets. I think that's just a bad Dick Cheney joke. But writer-director Adam McKay hits some satisfying bullseyes. And Christian Bale's transformation is a sight to behold. So
I think I know where this is going.
No, so we're not specifically going towards physical transformations. We're just talking the best Christian Bale roles, the best Christian Bale performances. But the point is, Christian Bale is a highlight of every movie he's in. My dad and I have discussed it, you and I have discussed it. He is an undeniable must-see actor. Everything he's in, he brings it, even if the movie itself isn't that great. And it sounds like Vice is a perfect example of that.
So, my question is, are we taking into account only his performance, or are we taking into account, general quality of the movie that he's in?
We're talking only his performance. I think, generally speaking, the rising tide lifts all boats, and these tend to be good movies that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But let's say, for example, he were a 10 and a 2. That's better than him being a 2 and a 10.
Got it. Okay. I can get on board with that.
So we're going to talk a little Christian Bale this evening.
I like it. I like this a lot. We haven't really done this yet, right? Just picked an actor and gone through their work.
No, and this was fun because you and I have been talking, and I think the folks in the audience will, I think, be supportive of this, about how to deal with top topics that aren't necessarily conducive to 10. And this was an interesting exercise because his career is so good it actually is conducive to a 10.
Yeah.
Even a 10 that I've seen. So it basically breaks down into 10 that I've seen. And then there's a couple others that I've seen a little bit of or I've heard of. But he has such a great career that there was enough material here.
Well, I'm very excited.
Yeah. So let's roll into it. So number 10 is his role as Batman / Bruce Wayne, specifically in The Dark Knight Rises. So I think that his performance in this, of the three films, I wouldn't say that it's the weakest. I would say that his character arc is the most traditional. I think that the work he does in movies 1 and 2 are a little bit more challenging for him as an actor, and we'll talk about those in a bit more depth. But the basic character arc for him in The Dark Knight Rises is pretty reminiscent of character arcs you've seen through a lot of different actors. It's a lot like Rocky. for example. It's kind of him a little bit older, a little beaten down, being totally beaten down, learning to come back from it, and sort of reckoning with his diminishing skills. That does not, I think, necessarily require an actor of uncommon skill. It just so happens that he is an actor of uncommon skill, and so he does all of those things especially well. So I think he gives an excellent performance in this movie, but I think it's probably his least challenging performance as Batman/Bruce Wayne.
I would tend to agree, and I would assume because of that, we'll be talking about the other two films later on.
We will be.
I think it makes more sense to talk about this movie in relation to the others. So maybe we save some of this conversation, but I agree. I think that in this movie, it's almost more of more of a physical role actually than the other two movies for him.
Yeah. And he does that really well too.
Yeah. And cause this movie I think one of the reasons I like this movie so much compared to the other two is that Bane and Tom Hardy is such a dominating physical presence, whereas Cillian Murphy and Heath Ledger are psychological terrors. Same with Liam Neeson. Whereas this movie, he's actually forced to, and I think I think it's worth noting, his physical performance in this movie is great. The way he fights Bane and the way he comes back and he climbs, that. Yeah. I think that's my favorite part of this role. And I think it's just in general less impressive than some of the other work that he's done, even in this series. I think that's fair to say.
Well, what I think is interesting, you raise a good point. So I tried to put together what I thought was the defining scene or quote for each of these roles. And the one I picked for this role was the parting scene between Bruce Wayne and Alfred. It's one of the most affecting scenes in the movies because I think it's really the emotional core of this film because Bruce at this point doesn't really have a relationship with just about anybody other than Alfred. And I really love that scene. The specific quote that I picked was when Alfred says, he tells Bruce that actually Rachel was going to leave him for Harvey in the last movie, which was this just huge cornerstone of the post-Dark Knight reality that Bruce Wayne is living in. And Alfred brings that crumbling down and he says, I know what this means. And Bruce responds and just says, what does it mean? And he says it in this really petulant way, which I think was so effective for Christian Bale, because in this one scene, he's heartbroken, he feels betrayed, but then he's this petulant little rich child who's what does it mean, Alfred? And I think that Christian Bale really, really nicely encapsulates the different things that the Bruce Wayne character is, all in this one scene that could have just been a little shouting match. And I think he did a great job with that. So I think from an emotional standpoint, that was probably his sharpest scene. But I think you're right. The stuff that he does so well in this movie is primarily physical. That final fight he has with Bane when they're on the steps of City Hall, I actually believe that he could take him down. And I think that is owed in large part to Christian Bale's really convincing physical presence.
That scene, and I think mostly of the sewer fight, where
the beatdown,
where he's just getting his ass kicked and he won't give up. I think he sells the fact that he really should just probably stay down.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so clocking in at number 9, it's actually one that I think is a relatively minor role in his career, but which I think, at least just for this one line, could only have been done by Christian Bale because he's so superlative, and that's his role in The Big Short. So for anybody who hasn't seen it, he plays, I forget what the real person's name is, but the character in the movie is Michael Burry or Barry. That's not the real guy's name, but it's based off of a real person who had the idea to short mortgage-backed securities that were issued by these large financial institutions during the credit crisis. And if that sounds boring, it is. That's an incredibly boring thing that I just said. And yet the movie makes it not boring. And Christian Bale, I think his character basically, at least the way the movie plays it, is very socially awkward. I would say perhaps bordering on having Asperger's or being somewhere on the autism spectrum. He doesn't interact very well with other people, but he's right. And he has this hilarious phone call with a representative from Goldman Sachs who thinks that they have a sucker on the line. And So he's talking to this person about how he wants to short this particular set of bonds, and it's like this really technical conversation, and this person's like, what the hell are you talking about? And he's reading through this prospectus, and it's just like this very ordinary but odd interaction. And then Christian Bale delivers this line, which is, my one concern is that when the bonds fail, I want to be certain of payment in case of solvency issues with your bank. So basically Christian Bale, this asshole, is saying, in case you, one of the largest financial institutions in the world, fails, I want to make sure you can pay me, some dipshit in like a garage running my own hedge fund. And I think only Christian Bale could have delivered that with the very unaffected speech pattern, but like total arrogance underlying it.
What I like about this role is that he's he doesn't have very many lows or highs. Like when things are going very poorly for him, he's very calm and like is handling it in kind of his own weird way. And I think it's especially cool at the end of the movie when he's proven right. It's kind of the same thing. He just calmly goes about basically collecting his winnings.
Yep.
And I think you're right. Like he's definitely like trying to portray someone like on the spectrum, and it's like very uncomfortable sometimes to watch him, which means that he's doing a good job. Yeah. And I just like really loved watching him play the drums.
Yes, the drums were a great little thing, and this sort of little quirk that you could imagine Christian Bale improvising.
Or like learning how to play the drums, maybe.
Like, yeah, he probably actually learned.
Yeah, probably.
He's like playing nights in some weird like Welsh nightclub just to get a feel for it.
He's a pretty notoriously famous method actor, so it wouldn't shock me.
No, it would not shock me either. So like I said, I think that's a relatively minor role, but I think the real Bale brilliance here is not, like you said, overdoing anything. This could have been a really hammy role, and he didn't make it that way, and he also seemed to really understand in a way that is very humble that this movie wasn't about him. Mm-hmm. Like that's one of the remarkable things as you go through this list of roles is that these are not all just leading man prestige roles. These are roles that he kind of picked and chose very cautiously.
That's what's so funny about The Big Short. It's like 4 kind of primary storylines, and his screen time is relatively small. And
it's like 10 minutes maybe.
And what's really interesting about that particular one is that he's pretty much just acting against himself. Like a lot of his scenes are just him in a room, whereas like the other storylines in that movie, it's a couple people playing off of each other. It's a group thing.
That's a really good point.
And his is it's like weird. It never like merges with the other storylines the way some of the other ones do. It's kind of interesting, like in a room performance from him. This is an underrated part of that movie, I think.
That's a really great point about his performance and only makes it better in my eyes.
Agreed.
All right, so number 8 was a recent example of a movie that I only went to see because Bale was in it. Turned out to be better than I expected, but he was just remarkable, and that's Hostiles.
Yeah.
So, Hostiles, the basic setup is I believe he's a Union soldier. He's a veteran, and he has fought many skirmishes on the American frontier with Native Americans, and he had one Native American in particular who he fought against and who massacred many of his troops. And he's assigned to escort this guy back from a federal penitentiary to his native lands. So basically this guy is dying of cancer, wants to go back to his ancestral lands to die. And they assign Christian Bale, who hates him more than anybody on earth, to bring him back. And he conveys his hatred in such a terrifying manner, but also argues for his point of view rather convincingly, like really convincingly portrays the fear of the frontier. So I want to give you my quick quote. The best scene of that movie was when he actually received his assignment, because he doesn't even have the person that he's eventually going to, like, you're going to see who he's so afraid of or hates so much. All you have are the ghosts in his eyes to convey what he's seen, and he just does it. So he gets the assignment, and he says back to his commanding officer, "Don't you dare laugh. There wasn't enough left of those poor men to fill a slop pail. Understand, when we laid our head downs out there, we're all prisoners. I hate 'em. I got a war bag of reasons to hate him. Skinny Figler, Edwin Tate. He raises a really good point, which is when we lay our heads down out here, aka the American frontier, we're all prisoners. Basically, the movie argues that if you live in fear, you're a prisoner, and I think he really pretty honestly and accurately conveys that living in the American frontier was a scary place to live. The point of view that he's very obviously missing is that to be a Native American at this time, you were also a prisoner because you lived in equal measure of fear. And that's for your life.
And that's something he figures out by the end, as you can imagine. But
yes, he does at least to a certain degree learn that. But I think it's still important to validate his point of view because his point of view is not one purely of bigotry. This is a person who's actually been out amongst the people of the American frontier and has experienced like really what can go wrong. And he's remarkable, this whole movie, but this scene in particular, to convey all of that in one scene was pretty impressive.
Two scenes that stick out to me. The first is that same one. And I think what was impressive to me is that there's a lot of characterization being done in that scene. In the way you just talked about, where you understand why he hates this particular group of people and one person specifically, but also very effectively done in that scene is it tells you everything you need to know about what kind of soldier he is, because it's cool to see him fighting against himself, how to respectfully tell a commanding officer that he's not going to do something, even though his sense of duty is one of the most important things in his life. You can tell from that scene. Like, those are the two defining characteristics of him. It's why he eventually does it, is this sense of duty. And that's why the movie works, is because you know how important both of those things and how conflicting they are. So I like that internal kind of thing he's able to show through his performance. And the other scene is very early on, they come across a woman who her family has been assaulted by some Native Americans and her kids have been killed. And he like flips a switch and all of a sudden is like super tender and super understanding. And like, you can tell by the way he's acting that his character has been in this situation before, probably many times. And it fills in like large swaths of his backstory very effectively.
That is such a great point. You're right, because if he did that and it felt like professional courtesy or bullshit, you just kind of pass by. It's like, okay, whatever, he's a soldier, he's dealt with this kind of thing.
Or if he responds to it the way his soldiers do, where they're like, what the fuck is happening here? Like,
yes.
But he knows exactly what to do. He handles it like he's done it 1,000 times, which is great writing and great performance from him.
Agreed. All right, so this is traditionally the part where we do our not top three. So I feel like we should cue some music.
All right. Music, cue.
All right, thanks, music. That was great. What a great session of music. So for this week's not top three, we're going to be talking about one movie. Because there's only one bad movie that Christian Bale has done, and that is Terminator Salvation.
This is so funny, because when you mentioned this topic, I started jotting down some movies, and I thought, how do you do a not top three for Christian Bale? And then I remembered Terminator Salvation. That's it. This is probably a not top three of one.
It's the only one. It is a not top three of one, because he's not good in it, and that movie sucks, and he's not good in it.
The only other thing worth noting is that this is apparently a movie where he absolutely lost his mind on set.
Yeah.
I think it's on YouTube. But it is. He berates basically an entire room full of people for basically not being able to keep up.
But what I think is interesting about this, if I recall correctly, he's especially angry that he's so in the zone and giving it everything he has, and somebody messes up a lighting cue or makes a bunch of noise. And it's great because maybe the perception is that he's an asshole, but I like to think that he's not. I think that he's just so crazy into his craft that anybody not respecting that really is gonna earn his ire.
I think both of those things are probably true. I think that he's probably an asshole.
Yeah.
Because of that. I think he's probably an understandable asshole, but
Yeah.
It's hard to watch the video and not feel like bad for the people that are there. But at the same time, like, if you have someone that full sends on everything he does like he does, you can also understand why you'd be really frustrated to have that not taken seriously by someone you're working with.
Yes, agreed. At any rate, Terminator Salvation is our not top 3.
All right. Also worth noting, just a terrible, terrible movie.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not a good movie. They should have stopped making those after T2. But at any rate. Number 7 is Bruce Wayne / Batman in the film Batman Begins. So, Christian Bale does some really important work in this movie in a few different ways. His Batman is fantastic. His Batman is physically something to behold. He is by far the most jacked Batman of all time. He's probably about 220 or 230 in that movie, which is considerably larger than any other Batman ever, and considerably larger than he will be again in that movie series, just presumably because it just was such a pain in the ass to be that big.
Yeah. The only bigger Batman than that is the one in the Arkham series.
Yes, that Batman is 295 pounds with 1% body fat.
Right.
But the real work that Christian Bale does in this movie is early on as Bruce Wayne. What I chose as his defining moment in this is the whole storyline with Joe Chill. A big precondition for the Christopher Nolan films to work is that we kind of have to believe anything can happen. Now, ultimately, Christopher Nolan has a crowd-pleasing instinct that means he kind of pulls back from some of the harsher things he could do in his films. But the real risk of a George R.R. Martin-esque, like, bloodbath or unexpected death or unexpected action has to exist. And Christian Bale very quickly convinces us that this white bread motherfucker might actually kill the guy who killed his parents. Like, I really thought that we were about to see Bruce Wayne kill Joe Chill when he goes to the courthouse with a gun and is about to shoot Joe Chill. I believed he was going to kill him, and that was going to be the thing that propelled this movie forward. That's remarkable acting, and it really sets up the stakes of this film very well.
Yeah, he sells the torture pretty well. I like it. And it's also kind of jarring to go back and watch this movie because he, like, really, really looks the part of, like, a young, like, has to assume the mantle of, like, a big family name, like, just out of college type person, which is weird. But yeah, it's kind of a striking aesthetic to him in this movie, and I think he sells, like, the younger, like, more vulnerable, volatile Bruce Wayne. Cause, like, by the time that we see him in Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, like, Bruce Wayne, at least, is a lot more polished. So it's cool to watch it and I think this is, like, a better performance having seen the latter two.
Yes, I agree with that. They reflect upon it well.
Yeah, for sure.
Alright, so number 6, American Psycho, his work as Patrick Bateman.
Oh boy.
You thought this would be higher?
I thought this would be at or near the top.
So, I'm not actually a huge fan of American Psycho. I am a fan of Christian Bale's performance in this movie. I have a hard time thinking of really any other actor who could have done this movie. Certainly, if there are others, it would be a short list of others. But the degree to which he sells the murderous, like, 80s corporate sellout is pretty stunning. It owes a lot to the source material, because that's what's on the page. But, oh boy.
He's equal parts, like, stunningly terrifying.
Yeah.
And also hilarious in this movie, which is, like, such a weird line to walk. And it's why this movie is, like, in general, like, extremely unpleasant to watch, because the two scenes I think of are close to the beginning when he's talking about his morning routine, and, like, that monotone.
God, I hate that.
First I apply, and Cameron can do he recites the whole thing, but, like,
of course he can.
When he stares in the mirror, he looks like he conveys that there's something wrong with him. Like, there's something wrong with his soul, and he just happens to be in this human body. And like he's
Yes.
staring out from behind like these human eyes, but he's not human. And like it has to do with the makeup, the way he looks like waxen and like like manufactured, but like that look is like impossible to shake. And so terrifying. And like similar to look when he's talking about the business cards.
Ugh, God.
But the other thing, but he's also like laugh out loud funny. Like when he's getting dressed and he's playing Huey Lewis and he's putting on the poncho and grabbing the axe. Like and he starts doing you know what I'm talking about, like the dance. I have the whole quote set up, but yes, the dance move. He's such a weird flourish that I once again trust him so completely as an actor that I kind of believe he just came up with that. I was gonna read, cause I read that. So the director, I can't remember her name, but she said that was not planned, and when he did that, she just laughed out loud and couldn't stop laughing and thought it was such like a weird like way to juxtapose like the the fact that he's a psychopath. Like they had to
and about to axe somebody to death,
right? Because he had a better business card than he did, right? Or because he got a reservation at Dorsia. So like, and then when I think personally one of their weaker works, the way he's analyzing the album, like
I have the whole thing. Yeah. I have it all. Their early work was a little too new wave for my taste, but when Sports came out in '83, I think they really came into their own commercially and artistically. The whole album has a clear, crisp sound and a new sheen of consummate professionalism that really gives the songs a big boost. He's been compared to Elvis Costello, but I think Huey has a far more bitter, cynical sense of humor.
Yes.
And it's just like, every line of that is cribbed from somebody writing in a more tasteful magazine than he ought to be reading. Like, somebody wrote pieces of that in Esquire, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, and he just like cribbed the best lines from each of it, because he has no soul.
Yes, he's like a machine reciting it.
Yeah.
But it plays for laughs. It's very funny.
Yeah.
I'd also like when he says, like the way he like switches into like this weird, like false joviality. Like, they're at Darcia and he says something like, "Hey, cut me some slack, I'm a child of divorce." Like, it's like super hammy, and it's like what you would do if like you were trying to be like lighthearted and funny and you didn't know how to do it, and he sells it.
Yeah.
It's incredibly unnerving. And I think for me this is higher, but glad it's on the list at all.
Yeah. So that's American Psycho. Number 5 is his role as Alfred Borden in The Prestige. So, without giving too much away, Christian Bale does a lot of heavy lifting in this movie, but what I think is so remarkable about this is he conveys the sense of a true believer in a way that is very convincing. So, long story short, he's a magician, and he has a competition with Hugh Jackman's character, who is also a magician, and they have two very different styles. Hugh Jackman is a performer, which is not surprising given his background. He's like this great performer, has a real stage presence. Christian Bale's character is interested in what he would term true magic. Like, he wants to really perform great illusions, and he doesn't really care how pretty they are or how many people watch. He just wants to perform great magic. And I think that that's a really hard thing to put on a screen without seeming hammy or like you're making fun of the idea of true belief, because true belief is really easy to make fun of. It just is. It's funny. Like, when somebody really believes in something, it's very natural to tease them about it. And so I think very typically when you show somebody who has like strongly held religious beliefs or patriotism or believes in some cause or like the Jedi, like, you just look like an idiot on screen, because that's the kind of the lowest common denominator. And for him, I think he conveys somebody who believes very deeply in this idea of true magic without ever crossing into self-parody, which is, I think, pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the movie helps sell that in the way that you realize how far he'll go. And, and I think, I don't want to give anything away, but like, upon rewatching, there are subtleties in his performance that you would not notice the first time through that you pick up the second time through that reflect like a true mastery of like the subtlety of body language and that kind of thing. So I feel like anyone who's listening to this podcast has probably seen The Prestige anyways, and I think you'd probably understand what I'm talking about. But I agree with you, and I think that aspect of like selling the true belief is something not stupid, but is something to admire, only is reinforced upon further watches of it.
Absolutely. And the quote that I ended up picking, which relates closely to what you're talking about, was the back and forth that he has with his wife, where she says that some days you love me and some days, or you tell me you love me and some days you mean it and some days you don't. What's really fascinating is upon further review, in a very subtle sense, you can see what she's talking about. He doesn't oversell it.
Yeah.
But when you watch it again, he does mean it sometimes. And he does not at other times.
And how much of that is you as a viewer projecting that onto it? I don't know.
A little bit.
I'm sure. But I do really think that there are differences. And I believe I'm a true believer that Christian Bale was addressing what he was doing very seriously and with a very particular mindset.
Well, this is like when Tom Brady throws a pass to a spot and Julian Edelman isn't there. I default to believing that he threw it to the right spot and Julian Edelman just was in the wrong spot. He's earned the benefit of the doubt, and I think Christian Bale has certainly earned the benefit of the doubt.
Agreed.
Alright, so that brings us to number 4. One of our favorite roles, one of our favorite movies, Christian Bale as Dan Evans in 3:10 to Yuma.
Oh, Dan.
So, I think that this role is one of the more traditional sort of roles and character arcs that he has really ever done, because he's pretty typically searches out those unconventional roles that we've discussed. What I think is particularly interesting about this role for him is that he clearly timed it at a certain point in his career. So at this point in his career, he is Batman. There's no question, there's no debate, he is Batman. He's about to become John Connor and try to become, the lead in the Terminator series. Like, he has developed a bit of a type. He is Mr. Big, Strong, Macho Man. And then he comes out with this movie where he plays an amputee, clearly emotionally scarred veteran of the Civil War who does nothing but disappoint his wife and children. For that choice alone, I have to start this movie in the plus territory, like with his role, because he just decided to do something that was a total left turn from what he was doing at that point in his career. And like I said, it's a fairly traditional role, fairly traditional character arc. But what he does with it is so interesting. This movie is probably a B-, like a C+ without him. But him as the emotional core of this movie, notably playing very well off Russell Crowe, who's also outstanding, is really important for this movie. Because if you watch this movie and don't believe his arc, you don't believe, just logistically, you don't believe this movie would happen the way it happens, but you also wouldn't invest in it the way you do without him.
No, absolutely. And I think the defining theme of this movie is conviction and seeing through what you say you're going to, right?
Yeah.
And I think what he does so effectively is sell the fact that, like, doing what he says he's going to do is not easy for him at any point in this movie. And,
no.
And like very few, like, he really doesn't want to be doing it.
Nope.
But he's doing it. And like that, like, determination and kind of gritting your teeth and bearing it, like, he sells that really well, and you don't have the payoff you do without like, because if this is something that's easy for him, like, if this is something he does every day and it doesn't cost him anything, then there's no point to this movie.
Yeah.
But it does. And I think that's the biggest thing that Bale does in this movie. Because to be totally honest, I think Russell Crowe probably has a more important role in some ways than Bale does. And I think his performance is super impressive, maybe even more so. But you need both halves for this movie to work, and
But see, I think what you're getting at is, I almost agree with what you're saying, but I tend to think that Russell Crowe happens to have the shinier part, but I don't think the better part, and I think it's really important that we have both sides of this play as strongly as they do, and I think in some senses, the Bale part is the more difficult part. I think it's sort of like being the Pine to the Foster in, whatchamacallit, Hell or High Water. Like, you have to play the quieter, sort of more reserved character can be more difficult in some ways.
I think it's a more nuanced role for sure. And so I think it's a greater degree of difficulty.
Yes.
Which he pulls off.
And the quote that I picked for this one is, it's just one of the most heartbreaking scenes I've ever seen in a movie. It's before he's about to go off with Ben Wade and hopefully bring him to justice. He has a conversation with his wife who's telling him it's really stupid for him to go. And he says, if I don't go, we gotta pack up and leave. Now I'm tired, Alice. I'm tired of watching my boys go hungry. I'm tired of the way that they look at me. And I'm tired of the way that you don't. Now, that's just a pretty brilliantly written line. Like, that's brilliant. That's such a good, it's a really clean sentence construction. Like, it really flows nicely. It's got good symmetry to it.
It's kind of a confusing sentiment that is not confusing at all.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way he says it, he's whispering because he knows his boys might hear. And he's already so embarrassed of what his oldest son thinks of him. And he wants to preserve the way his younger son thinks of him. So he's whispering this, and he's whispering it so desperately that you can't help but remember this scene the whole movie where he does think he has to do this thing, but he also has this just soul deep desire to be something other than what he thinks he is.
It's a beautiful film. And what I think I love so much about this movie is that it's a really good movie if you just focus on what we've been, like the emotional, like, tete-a-tete with Bale versus, with Russell Crowe. But, like, this is also, like, a really good, just, like, action western. Like, it's both parts. I don't know, every time we talk about this, we, like, rave about it, but this is such a good movie.
Amen. All right, so honorable mentions. I get a couple of them. I've actually only seen 2 of these, and I really like both of them, but I want to mention a bunch. So, The Machinist, that's the movie that he became famous for losing like 100 pounds. If you Google it, it's pretty sickening. He plays a guy who doesn't sleep, and he's like 110 pounds. It's crazy.
It's pretty gross.
Yeah. Another one where he loses a lot of weight is Rescue Dawn. So I saw part of that one. He plays a fighter pilot who's downed. I forget where, but he ends up in the wilderness, gets taken in as a prisoner of war, tortured, loses a lot of weight. The part that I saw, he was really good. I don't know. It was kind of a weird movie, but that was one that he got famous for. One that I saw and really liked, and which was really weird, is The New World. So that one is the story of Captain John Smith, Pocahontas, but told in a much more, now my understanding is there's some factual dispute, but a much more grounded take on that. And if I remember correctly, he plays John Rolfe. I remember he plays a real asshole, and he plays it really well in a movie that's really unsettling and funky. It's just very much him. So that was a good one for him that I liked. One that he may even have been nominated for an Oscar. I don't think he was. I think maybe Cate Blanchett was, but I'm Not There, which was that Bob Dylan movie where a bunch of actors, both male and female, played different personalities of Bob Dylan. I know that's a big one. I'm mentioning a couple of these just because I've heard that he's good in them, but they don't particularly interest me. One other one that I'd like to see, I don't know how I've managed not to see it, is Out of the Furnace.
Yes.
Have you seen that one?
No, but it's been high on my list for a long time, and I remember reading the description and just thinking, like, this is perfect for Bale. I have to see it.
Well, I think maybe we should put that on our movie weekend.
I think that would be a prime candidate for that.
Well, what's interesting is the reviews of that one, as I recall, were, hey, this movie's kind of fine, but Christian Bale is electric, which is basically the baseline review for his movies.
Yeah, it's weird he's been in so many, like, movies that are like incredible around him as well. But I think
Yeah.
that's where he really, like, for me, I think the poster child for that is Hostels.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like this is probably similar to that.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And then the last one I wanted to mention from sort of my personal back catalog is a movie called All the Little Animals. I feel like I may even have mentioned this one before, but he plays a mentally disabled kid growing up in, I think, the British countryside who has this really interesting habit where he takes roadkill and he buries it properly. He has this sort of feeling that these animals ought not to be left on the road. And he's not supposed to be leaving his home, and he ends up getting in a lot of trouble. I think he has like a mean stepdad because he's going out and doing this. And that's it. Like, there's really not a whole lot more to this movie, but he did a really sensitive and interesting job portraying somebody who had a mental disability, did it really well, and made a really just odd subject matter really compelling. It was a pretty remarkable performance. I think it might actually have been the first movie I saw him in after Batman Begins.
Whoa.
So it was an odd time in my journey with Christian Bale, like, to see that right after Batman Begins, but it was really good. And if anybody has got like a Saturday afternoon with literally nothing else to do, it's got to be like literally nothing else to do, I would recommend that movie because it was very good.
Okay. I think I know what our top 3 then are if we're done with honorable mentions.
I think probably. So number 3 is The Dark Knight. So this is his role as Batman, Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight. So I think the reason that this is the highest ranking of his Batman appearances is pretty simple. He's going up against one of the greatest performances in film history. I think safe to say. Mm-hmm. And he holds his own. That's all he had to do. Like, he is not the core of this movie. But he has to hold the movie in enough tension with the Joker character to make it work. Because if he's just railroaded by the Joker, either in the logic of the movie or sort of outside of the logic of the movie, where we as viewers are like, he's just overmatched, Heath Ledger's just outacting him, then this movie doesn't work. And no scene encapsulates that better than the Joker/Batman showdown at the Gotham police station. The interview, the Joker is spewing some high-level shit, philosophical stuff, big picture justice stuff, existential shit. He's intimidating, he's scary, he's all this stuff. He's throwing a lot against the wall, and Heath Ledger is just going for it. And Christian Bale absolutely goes 12 rounds, 15 rounds with him. Like, he really holds up in this scene.
That's the first one that came to mind that I was going to mention. It's also interesting because it's like, I don't know, for me, like, he's most impressive as Bruce Wayne because, like, by definition, the Batman stuff is kind of, you know, like, exaggerated and masked and, like, put through a filter. But, like, this scene in particular, like, it's really wild and it, like, kind of puts you on your heels, and the way he, like, jams the chair underneath the door. Mm-hmm. And, like, he's pissed. Like, he's really, really, really angry in a way that is cool because the whole point of Batman so far is that he's not really a person, you know? Yeah. Like, he's a Batman. And so, like, to see the emotion come through, like, and he's still doing, like, the voice and everything, but he's fighting it. Like, it's like a super, super, super intense scene, and half of that is because Heath Ledger is amazing, but the intensity comes from Bale.
Well, that part, what you're saying about the physical manifestation of it, that part where the Joker says, "I'm gonna tell you," and it sort of pauses this, like, crazy tension that's been building up. Like, things are starting to really escalate. Like, he's beating the piss out of the Joker. Like, he's in danger of killing this guy, which is what the Joker is trying to tempt him into doing. And the Joker says, "But I'm gonna tell you. And I'm gonna tell you why." And, like, he pauses the conversation and you see Batman just, his chest heaving, and you hear his breath and you see him heaving and you believe, I don't know who on set was in charge of this department, but somebody had actually, like, gotten him to the point where he was that angry, because you can't fake that effectively. Like, the Christian Bale underneath all of that had somehow worked himself up into that lather.
Yeah. Yeah, he makes that scene.
Yeah. So that's The Dark Knight. I had a couple other little notes from that movie that I thought he did really nicely. One thing I think is the Bruce Wayne stuff with Alfred is really good in this movie. Yeah. I love the scene when they're shutting down the Batcave, or the proto Batcave, and Alfred says, like, you know, we're gonna go, you're gonna get locked up for this, and he's like, I can't believe I'm gonna go down as your accomplice, and he's like, accomplice? I'm gonna tell him the whole thing was your idea. And it's just this really cute, funny moment that he pulls off with real grace. That's not easy to do that in the same movie where you just, like, blew a load in an interview because you're so angry. Like, this one person doing both of those acting jobs in one movie is pretty remarkable.
Agreed. I love it when he says, it's like, well, Alfred, you can finally say you told me so.
Yes. Well, I did bloody tell you.
That's right.
All right, so that's number 3. Number 2 is The Fighter, Dickie Eklund. So this is a movie that, like several of these, is like a B-. Like, this is a good, fine movie. It's good. This is a good movie. Christian Bale elevates this movie so far beyond what this movie should be, in large part because he has to carry the fact that Mark Wahlberg is the lead actor, and all Mark Wahlberg does in this movie is just, like, look lost. And it's fine. It actually works. Like, it actually works in the context of this movie, but he does nothing. Mark Wahlberg does nothing in this movie except just sort of be there, because Melissa Leo plays the mom, and she's a firecracker, and she's awesome. His sisters are crazy, and the Dickie character played by Christian Bale is a big personality, and so I think it's really important that he fill the void left by the putative lead actor. And the part that I picked from this movie that I thought was best was the scene where Dickie is giving Mickey his ringside speech. And I have it. I can read it if we want to. But basically, the whole movie, there's this ongoing bullshit about whether or not he knocked down Sugar Ray. And it's so interesting. He never really acknowledges the ridiculousness of that mattering. Like, it's not that he doesn't acknowledge the ridiculousness that it happened. It's just that it's such a big thing for him is never, like, he's not self-aware enough to recognize how weird that is. And then when he's trying to pump Mickey up, he sort of explains to him that it's not enough. Like, even if he did knock Sugar Ray down, Mickey can be better than that. And, like, it's this real moment of self-awareness that I think Christian Bale just imbues with such humanity. It's an amazing scene. It could have just been a rah-rah speech, but it's basically this one character admitting to his brother that he's a failure and that his brother doesn't have to be. It's really beautiful, and I think it's well written, but I think as delivered by Christian Bale is elevated.
Well, I think what happens is that, like, that becomes the story of the movie. Like, his journey from, like, to realize that about himself is, to me, like, the primary change that I care about in that movie.
Absolutely.
When really the movie should be about Mickey, like, doing something for himself, but for his family, for his brother.
Absolutely.
And it's not really about that. And, like, I think if this movie is like Matt Damon is Mickey and Ben
Affleck, honestly, Ben Affleck
is whatever, one of those guys, then that is that movie. It's about,
you're so right.
It's about the fighter. Like, the guy, and it's about Mickey in this movie. Like, when you think about it, that's not what you think about. Like Bale, like, literally hijacks this movie and it's all about him. I think what's really cool is at the end of the movie, if you watch through the credits, they show the footage of the actual Dickie. And you're like, oh my, I remember being, like, really stricken by it and, like, kind of like snapping kind of out of what I was thinking and being like, how did he do it? Cause it's like first of all, he looks like him. Like, they did a good job with that. But the way he, like, talked and, like, moved his head, you know?
The movement, that was the big thing, was that tick he has where he's moving his head back and forth. once again, a choice as an actor that could have devolved into parody doesn't ever.
This is like he literally hijacked this movie. I think, I suspect I know what your number one is. I think I would put this at number one, but let's talk.
Yeah, so number one is American Hustle, his role as Irving Rosenfeld. So, you've seen American Hustle, correct?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
We saw it as a sub-movie.
Yes, that's what I thought. So, this is another movie that's like good. It's a good movie. It has about an hour of great in it. I think basically everything that happens after Bradley Cooper does cocaine in the bathroom with Amy Adams is great. Like that's when the movie
the inflection
is great.
Point.
Yes, everything from that point on is great.
Yeah.
Everything before that's like fine.
Yeah.
But there are a bunch of great individual performances in this movie. Bradley Cooper is so shockingly good in this movie, and this was back when it was shocking for Bradley Cooper to be this good. Jennifer Lawrence is unreal. She steals the show every second she's on the screen in this movie.
She knocks it out of the park. I think this is one of her like roles I think that gets overlooked.
Yeah.
It should not be, but
what's crazy is that Christian Bale holds his own with her in every single scene he is with her, which is hard to imagine. So she in character blows his character away every time they talk because he is so hopelessly in love with her and she doesn't care about him one lick. And so every interaction they have, she comes out on top because they're mismatched. But that's exactly what is supposed to happen. And he conveys that so perfectly. This was one I was trying to build my case for why this should be number one in a career of incredible acting performances. And it's really hard to build a case without actually pointing you to the movie because his work in this movie is very quiet. His moments of bravado seem kind of ridiculous. It's these smaller moments where you see him looking at Jennifer Lawrence with just such adoring, hopeless, unrequited love that are just pretty remarkable. And that's an emotion, like the emotion of heartbreak or the feeling of unrequited love that's been translated onto screen and done well before. I don't remember a time I've seen it done as well as he does it in this movie. He is such a loser. He's a very talented loser, and he's somebody who clearly could have gone in a different direction had things broken his way. But he's such a loser, and he plays it so perfectly.
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to overlook the physicality of the role too.
Totally.
Because it's such a big part of it. That scene where Bradley Cooper's character like touches his hair and he gets really mad and like has to like redo his hair and like stuff like that. Yeah, it's tempting to like have his role get lost in the shuffle because he's doing it next to Amy Adams and Jennifer Lawrence and Jeremy Renner and Bradley Cooper. Like,
yes, Jeremy Renner is very good in this movie too.
Love Renner. Yeah, I think part of my affinity for this movie is because we saw it as a sub movie and because I had like no expectations for it and was blown away by everyone in it. I think this one suffers for me because just as a sum of it, like as a result of the way the movie is, he's not front and center like he is in some of these other ones, which adds to the role in some ways. And I think, but I think if we were to make a list of his greatest performances, would detract from it a little bit.
Well, so I think that sort of begs the question of what are we talking about here? Are we talking about greatest performances or greatest roles? And I think there's a slight difference because I would argue passionately that this is his greatest performance. Like I said, I have a hard time gathering evidence for it without just saying go watch it, which is kind of flip, but it's hard. This one is hard to describe until you see it, and obviously you have. But I think the question of whether this is his greatest role is a little bit of a different question. And I think in the role sense, because he is more secondary in this movie, it probably suffers by that.
But I don't think that's the conversation we should be having. I think we should be talking about performances and I think we should just get into this ranking now because I don't have any others to add.
Yeah.
I think that his greatest performance is The Fighter for the reasons we've discussed. Like because I think part of that is if we're talking about roles, because that wasn't supposed to really be his role, and he changed the movie with his performance, and you have something to compare it to. Like, I think for me that, and then I would actually put American Hustle at 3 behind American Psycho, because I think even though it's so off the wall, like, I think sometimes, like, you see this with Jim Carrey, like, sometimes where, like, being off the wall is just, like, it's too much, and, like, but, like, this role, I think, because it's a balance of, like, the terrifying and the funny, like, he's walking a tightrope that, like, that kind of role usually doesn't require. Mm-hmm. So I would put it up there. Like, 'cause I think American Hustle is a less challenging role than those other two, which detracts from its greatness and its execution. So
I hear what you're saying, but I think the question is, how much does he elevate it? And I think he elevates the American Psycho role and the American Hustle role nearly in equal measure in very different ways, because I think that playing a mopey, frumpy schmuck basically is pretty easy. But he decided to do something much deeper and much, much different, and in its own way, much more like the Jim Carrey selling out route. And so I think he kind of does the same thing. It's just in a different direction because it's a different kind of role. My inclination of your analysis of those three would be I would cede the number 1 position to The Fighter, because I do think ultimately what we will remember Christian Bale for in his career is the crazy shit more than the amazing subtle shit. I would like to give the amazing subtle shit its proper due. And so I would like American Hustle at 2, because I think that's his best, I'm being a, like, in the weeds actor movie. Whereas The Fighter is probably his best, like, I just decided this is my movie now role.
I can get on board with that. And you're right. There's definitely, like, a certain level of impressiveness from doing what he did with a role that's not as tailor-made to be jumping out of the screen at you like Patrick Bateman is, right? Isn't that his name? Bateman?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I like. So if we did The Fighter, American Hustle, American Psycho, how do you feel about the next couple?
I would move The Prestige up to 4, I think. I think that the subtleties we discussed in that role elevate it a little bit more than I think Dan Evans.
See, I'd be willing to go above Dan Evans, but I think I want to keep The Dark Knight where it is, because it's The Dark Knight.
Sorry. Yeah, so I would...
you meant 5.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay, yep.
So we would go Fighter, American Hustle... Oh wait, did we then say American
Psycho at 3.
American Psycho, Dark Knight,
Prestige,
3:10 to Yuma. And then I actually like the rest from there. I think that's probably the right way to do it.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right, buddy. That was good.
Feels like we have a list.
I think what we have right here is like the definitive top 10 list of Christian Bale performances / roles.
Want me to run through them?
I think you should do it. I think it's your list.
All right, beautiful. So at number 10, we have Christian Bale as Old Man Bruce in The Dark Knight Rises. Number 9, Christian Bale as the brilliant hedge fund manager Michael something or other in The Big Short. Number 8, in the very scarred and haunted Captain Blocker in Hostiles. Number 7, the young and once promising Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins. Number 6, the hobbled and very sad and inspirational Dan Evans in 3:10 to Yuma. Number 5, the wide-eyed true believer Alfred Borden in The Prestige. Number 4, the pretty psychotic Batman in The Dark Knight. Number 3, the very psychotic Patrick Bateman in American Psycho.
Yeah, Jesus.
Number 2, the truly tragic Irving Rosenfeld in American Hustle. And number 1, Christian Bale's greatest role, greatest performance, the very unsettling and very fascinating Dickie Eklund in The Fighter.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
That's good.
Thanks, dog.
I gotta go watch 3:10 to Yuma right now.
I know, I'm gonna go watch that probably. Or at least a couple clips.
Yeah. Alright. Should we tell...
Oh boy. Yeah, let's talk about some stuff.
Do you want me to do mine first? Switch it out?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so you guys probably enjoyed our theme music and our not top 3 music. Those are both composed by Kevin MacLeod. And of course, our beautiful artwork, as always, designed by Aaron Sant, who's on Instagram. It's Sant Design.
So I'm going to talk about, even though I tried to say goodbye about a minute ago there, I'm going to tell you where to find us. So if you need to find us, check us out on whatever podcast app you use, be that Stitcher, Google Play,
Nice.
the Apple Podcast app, Podbean, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Check us out there. Check us out on Twitter at top10, top TENKM. Send us an email at our Gmail, top TENKM at gmail.com. And coming soon, maybe when this podcast is out, because we are trying to stack a couple up here, our Instagram.
That's right.
Handle to be determined by what is available.
Very good.
Probably something on the top 10 KM theme.
Hopefully that's not taken.
Hopefully not.
Alright. Yeah, so let us know what you think. Tell us where we screwed up on this and other podcasts. And
We know you will.
absolutely. And we'll see you next time.